Greetings, everyone, from Iona Abbey, and at the moment via Pemaquid Harbor, Maine. My name is Phyllis Ives, and I'm honored to be your host today as we celebrate the reopening of the Iona Abbey at living areas. It's been 3 long years since there have been guests staying within these ancient walls, and now that's changed. Most of you on this webinar know what has happened here and why it's important. You know because you made it possible to have so much to celebrate today. So in fact, we are here to celebrate you. It is impossible to express how grateful and how humbled we are for your wonderful support. Today, there'll be 3 parts to this program. Firstly, we'll be talking a bit about how we got here and what we hope will happen in this new and exciting phase of the Abbey's long history. Second, we'll take you into the Abbey Church for worship to dedicate and bless this new accessible space. I hope you've received the email with the order of service. It looks like this. You'll note that there's a section in the beginning with a series of blessings for different sections of the renovations. We won't be able to join that part of the service for security and logistical reasons. We will be going into the Abbey Church, and those of you who have been watching have seen some of that, starting with John Bell as he teaches the hymns being sung today. As part of the service, the Book of Commemoration, recognizing our donors, will be brought in to be hallowed. This book has each of your names inscribed and will remain here in the Abbey on display. So the next time you come, please look for it. Our sponsor, the Princess Royal, is going to sign the book and address the congregation. She'll be arriving at the Abbey shortly. And then in the third part of the program, we'll be talking to some of the folks at the Abbey today to get their thoughts about what's going on. But we'd like to start with a short video that was actually produced a year ago when the capital appeal was almost done. The capital work was almost done. And we really thought this celebration was about to happen then. But by then the pandemic was tightening its grip on the world. So we'll go to the video now.
When George MacLeod talked about creating a laboratory for renewal and transformation, he could hardly have imagined Peter's creative vision for the inclusive, renewed facilities which are now being brought to fruition at Iona Abbey. It was a very different world. Even now, since the last AGM, the world has shifted significantly. But against all the odds, the Iona Abbey capital appeal is almost completed. Building work is now drawing to an end with only 65,000 left to secure of the 3.7 million target.
We have weathered many challenges and been blessed with a few miracles along the way.
We have endured the stark discovery that the capital project to renovate the Abbey was not simply aspirational but imperative. It was a shock to learn that the Abbey infrastructure was failing and the monastic areas would not be fit for purpose in 5 years or less. This meant that the amount of money to be raised doubled from what was already a stretch to achieve, and it meant that we could not wait until we built up our fundraising capacity.
We have endured the devastating tumult of leadership changes, starting with Peter MacDonald's illness and ultimately ending with his death.
We have endured the shockwaves of COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdown, closing the construction site within days of completion and closing the doors on Iona Community offices, with staff furloughed or shoring up operations from makeshift home offices.
And yet, we have been so blessed. With Peter's vision and leadership that began, defined and drove forward this capital project from the very start.
We have been blessed with dedicated volunteers and staff that have worked so hard for so long to support this incredibly complex project. The right people kept stepping up at just the right time. Margaret Smith, for example, who, during lockdown, has been inscribing donor names in immaculate calligraphy on Kells-inspired pages for months. The finished book will be bound, placed in a special carved wooden box and displayed in the Abbey.
We have been blessed with the opportunity to reach out to and connect with many whose lives have been touched by the Iona community. People who were not already involved in supporting our work, such as Winchester College and the Wykehamist Society of Graduates, who, as he was an alumnus, know of and appreciate George MacLeod's achievements.
We have been blessed with the surprise of receiving the assets of the long-defunct Ark of the Covenant, worth almost £1 million. Surprise is probably not adequate to describe Benedict's reaction when a solicitor for the Ark called Carlton Court one day.
They had been appointed by the Charities Commission to find a suitable charity to receive the remaining assets of the Ark of the Covenant, which had ceased to exist in the 50s. That purpose was to spread Christianity to remote places. Iona Community somehow became the best fit, and it couldn't have come at a more fortuitous time, taking us within possible reach of the target and bringing renewed vigour into fundraising efforts.
We've been blessed with a significant increase in the level of awareness of the Iona community and its work around the world through the love of so many for the Iona Abbey.
2,407 donors from 22 different countries have given in large ways and in small ways to the capital appeal. Many of them had never donated to the Iona community before.
We have been blessed with a much enhanced collaborative relationship with the island organisations, which have at the same time taken on major projects including new housing, the village hall and renewables. We have and are still working closely.
Through the focus on increased access, 2 new initiatives have emerged from the appeal. Support for the inclusion of marginalised groups to participate in community life at Iona Abbey, plus an initiative to digitise Iona community stories and records.
So now, with the end in sight, we can anticipate the use of these beautiful new spaces and wonder, how will they shape our future?
We will actively offer a more inclusive welcome to work and worship in community and think creatively about how spaces can increase access.
We will reach out to marginalised groups with a new networker post in partnership with others such as the Poverty and Truth Commission.
We will nurture the new relationships that have merged through the 7-year journey of the appeal and build on significant intentional interest and support.
We will model sustainable living whilst sharing the renewable story.
And we will continue to enrich our relationships with other island projects and our mindfulness of the impact and contribution to the island community.
The story of Iona Abbey is quite unique, one of the very few historical sites that is still being used for its original purpose, to be a sanctuary and a light. This still draws people from around the world to be inspired and awed.
Once every few generations, there is a momentous new chapter in its story, but this part of our story coincides with such a significant chapter of our times in our families and our communities across the globe is both a challenge and a blessing. And we are reminded that the Reverend George MacLeod asked,
Do people want Iona as a memory of the past, or as an inspiration for days of difficulty ahead?
So now here we are. We've finished the Abbey Capitol, as well as all of the massive complex renovations that you've made possible. And the Abbey doors are reopening. Next slide, please. There's a lot to celebrate here on Iona. It's a very busy time for a very small island. The Iona community has just welcomed our first guests since August of 2018. Because of the pandemic, we can't yet open these doors quite as widely as we want to, but it's a fine start. Some of these guests are community members, staff, and volunteers who have worked so hard to get us to this point. Other guests are part of our developing Unlocked program. Unlocked is making Iona community spaces on the island available to those who could benefit most from healing and respite. They are frontline healthcare workers, and others who have experienced extraordinary loss or have been under extraordinary stress made worse by the pandemic. The year 2021 marks the 1500th anniversary of St. Columba's birth. Had we opened as the Abbey had planned, we would have missed this. But because the pandemic delayed until now, we suddenly have ourselves aligned with this significant date for the founding of the Abbey and for Christianity in Scotland. And then if we could go to the next slide, please. The Abbey renovations have not been the only building work going on here. Construction of the new Iona Village Hall has been roaring along and will be opening its beautiful doors in the next few months. It will be the island's everything place. Children will grow up here. Next slide, please. They'll have birthday parties, perform their school plays, dance and get married. It will be the debating chamber, the stadium, the cinema, the playground, the ceilidh floor, and the general gathering area. It will be the very heart of the island community and will benefit generations of islanders and visitors for years to come. And then another initiative of the island is Iona Renewables. And this is to develop and install a low carbon heat system and sources of renewable electricity for the island. I'm quite sure you're going to be hearing more about this in the future, but for now, back to the Abbey. This is what we all recognize as Iona Abbey, but it hasn't always looked like this. This is what it looked like around 1800, about 250 years after most of the abbeys in the British Isles, including Iona, were destroyed by King Henry VIII. Then, in 1890, the Duke of Argyll gifted the Abbey ruins to the Church of Scotland on the condition that they rebuild the Abbey Church. And they did, and it looked like this. The Abbey Church was brought back, but the common areas were still in ruins. Then, in 1938, in the depths of the Great Depression, the Reverend George MacLeod brought ministry students and craftsmen together to begin to rebuild the Abbey common areas. And they did, and starting the Iona Community along the way. And the people came, pilgrims and commoners and royalty, like today. And just like today, or somewhat like today, as they didn't have a pandemic to contend with, George MacLeod, as the leader of the Iona community, led a worship service to celebrate the rebuilding of the Iona Abbey living areas. Ever since then, the Iona community has taken up the mantle of Columba to offer a place of worship, inspiration, and learning in the rebuilt Abbey, with a few more people than we could get together today, making it one of the few ancient places in any country that has continued to its original purpose, brought into the context of the modern world. But the Abbey accommodations, as you heard a bit earlier, were not perfect. Guests were sleeping in bunk beds, 8 beds to a room, if you could get in them or to them. That required navigating a variety of stone, concrete, and even spiral stairways, not what the Iona community wanted as a vision of hospitality. So in 2012, the very beginning, Peter MacDonald, then the leader, pulled a development team together and began the long process of figuring out how to make the spaces more accommodating for everyone, as well as how we were going to pay for it. This included how to change rooms from 8 people into rooms for 2 while still having close to the same number of beds in a 12th century abbey. As the architects and engineers dug into that challenge, they discovered that virtually all the infrastructure was succumbing to the harsh weather conditions on Iona, and the Abbey community areas would no longer be fit for purpose in 7 years or less. Now we had an entirely different project with an extreme level of urgency that really had not existed before. There was no more debate about waiting for a more auspicious time. That was the start of a massive effort around the world to raise £3.7 million so that the Abbey would continue to serve. And an equally massive effort to plan and design all the physical changes that had to be made, then build them into reality as the funds became available. Now, Thanks to your generosity and that of thousands of others around the world, the residential areas of the Abbey will be fit for purpose for many years to come. An accessible, flexible, sustainable place of worship and community, inspiration and comfort. And now, while we're waiting to go to the interviews, we'd like to show you some shots of some of the changes that we've made, so that you can look at the new living areas and see how the Abbey has changed and how it remains the same. We're looking at the new kitchen now and the servery. The refectory, and we're looking towards the Abbey kitchen. The refectory from the other direction, going out, looking out towards the door that goes to the Abbey church. And of course, the wonderful sanctuary reflected in the communion table. And the Abbey church set up for COVID. I would like to also thank our incredible techie team that's pretty spread out. Fidge in Northumberland, Aileen in Glasgow, and Jack at the Abbey. You've done a magnificent job, folks. Thank you.